highlighted findings from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that demonstrated businesses with 50 employees or fewer incur regulatory costs that are nearly 20% higher than for the average firm. And earlier this year, I introduced the Prove It Act, which will hold federal agencies accountable when they overlook important due diligence requirements as they impose sweeping regulations that maybe aren't right for small businesses. Do you think that businesses with 50 employees or fewer should be subject to the same regulations as businesses with over 500 employees?
Well, Ranking Member Ernst, I mean, I think they're unfair. A lot of mom and pop shops, they don't have the same resources as large companies do, particularly when it comes to compliance costs and legal experts that they have so that they can dive into the minutia of all of the federal code and figure out what regulations are new and how they can, abide by them. And when we think about women entrepreneurs, I mean, the members here, the panelists here have talked about it, and I've also talked about the research that, you're starting with a capital deficit to begin with. And so you're trying to build your business and at the same time trying to figure out what the regulatory burdens are at the federal level, not to mention state and local regulations that add a new layer of challenge. So absolutely, I think your bill, and there are other bills on the House side that look at every piece of new regulation coming out from every single agency, from energy all the way to labor, to ensure that there's going to be zero cost on small businesses, and to ensure that at least small businesses understand what those regulations are so that they can figure out how they can comply with them.
So the regulatory burden is pretty heavy
Yes.
on our small businesses. What about those broader economic challenges like the high interest rates, workforce challenges? How do those affect our women entrepreneurs as well?
Sure. Well, labor shortages are obviously not new. For decades, some industries like construction have had them, but we're seeing them in industries where women are concentrating their businesses. In the retail industry, but particularly in caring industries, whether it's home care services and aids, whether it's daycare centers, childcare. A lot of small businesses find it hard to find people to compete with larger companies that can offer greater pay and benefits. And so, all of these, it makes it difficult for you to be able to hire and retain your folks, and then add to that the regulatory costs that can come with keeping people employed.
Thank you. And as I mentioned in my opening statement, women in rural communities lack the same resources available to those that are living in more densely populated areas. And as I mentioned, there are 4 WBCs located within a 50-mile radius of Washington, D.C., and yet there's only one that is located in the entire state of Iowa. So how can we better assist women in those rural communities?
Well, interestingly, thank you, Ranking Member. Interestingly, there are a couple of different pieces that I think rural female entrepreneurs, challenges that they face. I mean, women, they tend to have lower incomes to begin with. Obviously, that means less capital to start their businesses. They have higher poverty rates, interestingly. And then there are the infrastructure gaps, and particularly when it comes to technology. We're seeing that rural women they're the least likely group to have internet access at home. Right. And so when we look at the information system today, and how many new entrepreneurs are starting their businesses simply with this little gal right here in their hands. If you don't have access to internet at home, then it's going to make it very difficult for you to be able to sell your your wares on the internet and to find folks. So I think looking at how we build infrastructure and make sure that infrastructure is, particularly high-tech infrastructure, is available, is going to be important. And then, I think the mentoring and the peer-to-peer coaching is very important. And so while it may be hard to find mentors, there may be peers in your area. You mentioned the fact that there are so few women business centers in rural areas, but maybe there are peer networks that can be built up and utilize technology to tap into all of the other women's centers that are in other states or in other regions. That could be a way of helping to ensure that our rural female entrepreneurs have access to the resources that they need.
Yes, and I appreciate you mentioning how much work we do on our phones. And I think a lot of women do actually start by using this type of technology. And in rural Iowa, I know of one woman that lived in southern Iowa. She did not have internet access at her home, and she lived on a farm. And so she would drive into her little tiny rural community in the evenings and sit outside of the Iowa State Extension office and draw off of their Wi-Fi and do all of her ordering and distribution on her phone. So we've got to figure out better ways of doing business. So thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Runa.